In this episode of the Playmakers podcast, I sit down with Sue Yannaccone, CEO and president of all of these brands. And we do a deep dive into the topics that most real estate agents are grappling with today.
The agent that uses technology will replace the agent that doesn't.
I ask Sue about the industry's battle over listing access.
The most access generally is going to drive the greatest price for a home. That doesn't mean it's always black and white.
We check in on the aftermath of the NAR settlement.
We have seen a change. I mean, there's no mistaking the fact that the way in which agents have to approach the conversation with their consumers has changed, but it's still early days.
And you may be surprised to hear Sue's advice to those thinking about starting a real estate team.
Start with the why. Why? Why do you want to start a team? Do you really want to run your own business?
The Playmakers podcast begins in 3, 2.
Welcome to the Playmakers podcast, where we go inside the minds and moves of those shaping the future of real estate. With your host, Andrew Flachner.
All right, Sue, I've really been looking forward to this conversation. You lead one of the largest real estate enterprises in the world with brands like Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Sotheby's International Realty, Corcoran, Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate, and ERA. And you've navigated massive change over the last few years, right? You have change within the industry, change within anywhere. And through our partnership at RealScout with you, I've had a front row seat to the way you lead with courage, with clarity, and with decisiveness. And so thank you for taking the time for this interview.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
For those of you who don't know the full scope of your role, do you mind just walking us through what your role is, what your day-to-day is?
Sure. So obviously I have the immense honor of overseeing all 6 of our tremendous brands, both our company-owned brokerage and our franchise business. So I also oversee some of our leads work for our affiliate networks. But really, I think about my day-to-day is helping support all my teams in their growth. What do they need to grow, whether it be within their own sort of business unit, within our agents? How do we help them get more listings? How do we help them get, through the transaction more smoothly? How do we help independent entrepreneurs in the franchise grow? And so day-to-day for me is really, how do I partner with my tremendous team within Anywhere to help everybody across the ecosystem grow and really continue to move the industry forward as well?
And you've been at Anywhere for, 10, 15 years?
10 years.
Okay.
It was just 10 years last week. So, yeah. I've been in the business about 25 years. So, yeah.
Right. And tell me how you ended up at Anywhere and how your role has evolved.
Yeah, I came over to Anywhere about 10 years ago as the chief operating officer of one of our brands, ERA Real Estate, and then had the opportunity quickly to run that brand as the president and CEO, and then took a little detour over to run a fair portion of our owned brokerage business. And I think, the ultimate story behind the journey, starts with my love of the business, my just passion for the industry, for real estate, for what it stands for what we help people do, whether it be a homeowner, an agent, or ultimately a consumer. And the journey within Anywhere over the last 10 years has really been one of opportunity that I've taken advantage of, opportunity being, offered me, and I've said yes to the challenges, and being willing to really dive in and look at where we can grow, where we can change, and learn all facets of the business. I think one thing that is unique in my career, which started a very long time ago as a licensed agent in commercial real estate, is I've done so many different facets of the business within franchise, within brokerage. I'm an operator. I like to execute. And all of that really comes together with a unique experience to bring to both our employee population and also all of our customers and look at the business from that 50,000 foot all the way down to what is happening in an office day to day.
Right. And what feels different to you about where Anywhere was when you joined 10 years ago and where it is today?
Besides my age. Look, I think it's a wholly different company. It's a wholly different company built upon such a tremendous foundation of, always doing the right thing by the customer. We're one of the world's most ethical companies. That has not changed. But what has changed is we are no longer really a company of companies, right? While we still have hyper unique brands with unique go-to-market strategies, we are focused on how we can leverage the scale of Anywhere in a way that we are uniquely positioned to do in the industry. So whether that be, back office technology and integrating our workflows in order to drive efficiencies in the process and take cost out of the whole ecosystem, to really operating as an integrated owned brokerage within our Coldwell Banker business. We have mortgage, we have title, insurance. How do we streamline that entire thing? And so I think we are a much more tech-enabled, digital-first company that is built on the foundation of strong customer advocacy and ethics and kind of doing the right thing by the customer in the industry.
Right. So I want to get into integrated services in a little bit. But before that, I'm going to start by asking some questions about the industry because there's a lot that my audience is grappling with right now, whether they be agents or team leaders or brokerage executives. And then we'll shift into some of the more Anywhere specific questions. Can we start by talking about the market? Where do you think we are in the market cycle?
Well, look, I think there's no hiding from the fact that we're still in an inventory constrained market. This is it's a little of a down cycle that we've been in for a number of years here, and I think that's actually highlighting the adaptability of agents and of companies to pivot and be agile to continue to flourish in this kind of environment. I think we're watching very closely, of course, inventory, mortgage rates, inflation, those types of things. But we're still seeing significant consumer demand.
Right.
We're still seeing that. And so I think we're at this shifting point potentially, but we're going to keep watching it and ultimately focusing on what we can control within our ecosystem. That's one thing we talk about a lot within this building, but also with all of our agents and our franchisees is focus on your controllables because the market's always going to shift. There's always going to be a lot of change, a lot in the industry and a lot in the macro. So let's focus on what we can control to position ourselves for whatever the next market cycle is going to bring to us, which, we'll wait and see.
Outside of maintaining that focus, is there anything that agents or teams or even brokerage leaders should be doing to navigate this tough market? I mean, it's been a pretty protracted, tough market.
It has. There's no shying away from it's been a protracted, tough market and longer than we're kind of used to seeing. And there's a lot that goes into that, right? Some of the stuff I touched on, the consumer confidence piece. I think agents and business owners always should be looking at, their spend, their investments, right? What is the ROI on your investment? What are you not taking advantage of? If you're an agent that your broker or franchisee is providing to you, what kind of support where you're adding cost and, sort of inefficiency in your business that's not driving a return. And agents should always be focused on how do I capture business within my sphere. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this. You and I have in the past, and continue. It's a lot of your business, but how do you continue to stay in front of and leverage that sphere? Are you looking at integrating technology? What's the one tool that maybe you've not used before that if you did it, it would take time off your plate? This goes for broker owners. This goes for business owners. It goes for agents. What's the one thing you're doing that, man, could AI do this and help me? Is
Right.
there a tool that could help me that if I just learned it, I could do one more transaction this year? I
Right.
could do get one more listing, spend that much more time doing what I do best. So I like to think about it as saying, sit back, take some real stock and inventory in what are you uniquely qualified to do within your role, whether, whatever that may be. And how do you make that better?
Right.
And then find stuff to do all the other stuff for you. So you're highest and best.
So what I'm hearing from you is discipline, especially around a P&L, and then being ROI focused, which goes hand in hand with discipline.
Yes, much more succinctly stated than but yes, it is. It's discipline. It's a relentless prioritization. In a market like this, you don't have time. It's all about in any market really, but it is about, and then also know your market, know what's happening in your market. So many consumers are guided by or only aware of the headlines, the big macro headlines, what they hear in mainstream news, which may be true in totality, but not in, on 123 Main Street. And
Right.
so how are you being the most educated person in the conversation at that kitchen table to guide that consumer to what's right for them in that moment? And I think that's really important when there's so much noise. that's even reaching consumers from mainstream today in our industry.
Right. Well, you mentioned AI, so I want to double
Yeah.
click on that because this wouldn't be an interview in 2025 if I didn't ask about AI. I just published an interview with Joe Lonsdale, one of the co-founders of Palantir. For those who are listening who are less familiar with Palantir, it's a $315 billion AI and data analytics company. And he had some really interesting takes on where AI intersects with knowledge work, whether those knowledge workers be financial advisors or real estate agents. He predicted that AI will automate support roles for knowledge workers, accelerate productivity, and widen the performance gap. And I'm curious, how do you see AI affecting real estate and more specifically real estate agents?
So he's spot on in the way that I would articulate my thinking on it. AI, for decades we talked about technology, and technology is going to replace the realtor. No, it's not, but it is. The same adage is true. It will replace, the agent that uses technology will replace the agent that doesn't, right? And I think that AI, in and of itself, as we think about it as, there's so many different use cases of it, right? And it goes well beyond, I'm using AI to streamline my inbox and help me prioritize my day. I'm using, generative AI to help me do various things in my workflow, the document flow, and really streamlining that process, creating more efficiency. And I think as an individual, how do you use it as a thought partner, right? Like, so you're the thought leader, and how do you guide, kind of AI to help you solve problems faster? And I think we're going to see that with agents in their marketing, in their, lead nurturing, in their sphere of influence marketing, and all of those things, whether it's, but it's going to be balanced, I believe, with where is the human leadership piece so critical still in the process. But for me, I look at it as a additive technology to help drive efficiency. And that's just the way of the world. And I think what we're going to see in this industry or in others are, the gap becoming driven by those who can think about the problem the technology can help solve.
Right.
And then how do you put it to work for you? And that will create that gap, because you're going to be ahead of the curve on leveraging it to become better at what you're doing, and you'll be better faster.
What role do you think Anywhere and its affiliates should play in helping agents adapt to this new world of AI?
I think there's part of it where you have to meet people kind of anywhere they are on this spectrum, right? Like on this transition to using it. And we used to talk about like even using digital wallets, and there's a continuum of where people are ready to use that or not. I think consumers are going to be in different places as to when they're ready to lean into a more tech-enabled, transaction, et cetera. So we look at it as, we have great scale, we have great amounts of data, and we have the ability to invest and have continued to invest in, research, to invest in, the building of tools, whether it be through marketing, through, listing concierge or some of our other programs. So ours is an opportunity to help educate, to help guide, and to give examples of what may work. And then also the flip side, which is phenomenal being our size, I learn a lot from our affiliates.
Right.
I learn a lot from agents. These are very industrious people, as we know, right? How are they thinking about using it that I haven't even thought about, right? So, and then how do I take that and scale it and think about a way to make everybody better because of it?
One thing that's come up in the AI conversation is that it might automate or depersonalize some of what makes real estate special and what makes agents really good at their jobs. You've been long bullish on sphere of influence marketing, and I'm curious, when it comes to building trust over time and nurturing relationships, does AI change the way you think about SOI marketing, sphere of influence marketing? Does it concern you?
I would say that it excites me, but it excites me with the right intellect put against it, right? This is not something where agents, one of the fastest ways to disintegrate that trust is to not take care with how you're leveraging the technology.
100%.
Never just sort of give it up to the technology to write a listing the listing description, or to replace where that human element is something, as I said before, you are uniquely qualified to bring to the transaction. I think that you will erode trust in the business if you are not editing your work, for lack of a better term, if you are being deceptive in your practices with respect to photos and
Right.
how are you putting guardrails? And that's a lot of what we spend time talking about here within Anywhere is, what are the right use cases? What are the wrong use cases? And what are the right use cases? What do we need to ensure that the right use cases stay sort of honest and have sort of intellectual integrity as you go forth in using them? And that means you've got to still own it. You can't just abdicate in totality. And I think that's where the trust factor comes in. And so much of, agents' business, still roughly 80% is done, through their sphere and people that they know. Don't lose sight of how important that trust is
Right.
in guiding people through their most important and largest transaction. We use a lot of, automation and AI on reading documents on the back end, in mortgage closings, in title business, et cetera. That is where it's awesome, but it doesn't remove the agent sitting there with them talking about the needs and truly understanding the needs of your client. So I think there's a place for both. But what are you as a human kind of uniquely qualified to bring to that transaction
That's
and that
right.
relationship?
Yeah, in a recent interview, my guest said man-machine symbiosis, right? Where does the human element come in? Where does the machine take some of the burden off of the human? All right, so I want to shift gears and talk about the NAR settlement. It has been some time since the settlement was announced, and this settlement was expected by many to have massive changes on the industry, how agents communicate about compensation, and even to the amount of compensation that agents in aggregate earn every year. How has it actually changed behavior in the field? Maybe we'll start there.
Sure. So it's been almost a year since the changes were enacted. It was August 17th. So look, we have seen a change. I mean, there's no mistaking the fact that the way in which agents have to approach the conversation with their consumers has changed. And I believe that's a good thing. I think that it has added to greater transparency required, more upfront and direct conversations with consumers, clarity going into a transaction around the economics and who's paying what, when, et cetera. And so I think that's been that's a big change in an industry like ours. I felt that our company and our agents handled it tremendously well. We spent a lot of time on education, on awareness, on forums, on talk tracks with consumers. And, I think all in all, it's been a good thing. We're the only company that publicly discloses our ABCR. So you can go back to our earnings to kind of dig in there if you want. But I think it's changed when in the conversation these very, very important things around, compensation, et cetera, are taking place. And so for me, of what we've seen is that upfront conversation, really good, transparent conversations, and clarity going in, which is really important.
Has it lived up to the level of disruption that a lot of people predicted?
I think it's lived up to just a significant change in our industry. And I think that's a good thing. Disruption, I guess it depends on how you define disruption, right? I think what we've learned is that agents are resilient,
Right.
that consumers value agents, and that they're continuing to utilize them in the transaction, and maybe have different conversations, have a really upfront, have agents be required to really, define and openly discuss what they're doing with the consumer in the transaction. I think it's a great education process that's now been maybe highlighted across the totality. It probably didn't happen everywhere. I think that's a really good thing. I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah, headline after headline in mainstream media has everyone believing that there's a precipitous drop in compensation or even the quantity of agents. What do you think? Are we still in the early innings on seeing how this all plays out?
I think we're definitely in the early innings. It's not even been a year, and you have to remember, homeowners, transact like every 10 years now or something, right? So this is not where you're going to have, a massive transaction change. Oh, it just, there's time here, right? And so I think the headlines, look, nobody knew, right? And we're watching and things are changing and you keep looking at it. But that's all part of the process. The industry is changing. I think the transparency with the consumer, the education, the awareness is a very good thing. But it's still early days, and we'll watch and see.
One area that I've been keeping tabs on, especially because it's impacting a lot of our customers, has to do with the changes to clear cooperation policy and listing access. With a recent lawsuit from Compass against Zillow, listing distribution has become one of the biggest battlegrounds in the industry right now. So, from your perspective, what's really at stake in this fight for brokers, for agents, and for any practitioner in the business?
We've been pretty clear and very vocal for a while that Anywhere's perspective is that clear cooperation needed reform, not repeal, that there was an opportunity to amend the requirements and the restrictiveness of it. I think the most important thing that many are losing sight of in this is, what does the consumer want and need? And fundamentally, that's what should be driving. If an agent is working with a consumer as a fiduciary to help them sell their home or help them buy a home, then access to information is critical. Having a clear view of everything that's available on the market is very important. Understanding, full transparency of the market space, and the most eyeballs and the most access generally is going to drive the greatest price for a home. But I think for what is ultimately being lost in some of this industry conversation is, what is the right thing for the consumer? That doesn't mean it's always black and white, right? And there are options that the consumer should have choice on. But that to me is being drowned out through a lot of the other fighting, et cetera. And that's why we're pretty clear on, we're going to keep doing what we believe is the right thing for the consumer, which is consumer choice to how they want to market their asset, and go from there.
But when you look at these big entities in real estate, whether it be the portals and the MLS and the brokerages, do you see more splintering, more fragmentation, or do you think that these different entities are going to be able to align?
I think it's really interesting that in a business where in all aspects of it, we're trying to simplify, to drive efficiency, to drive integration in the transaction, for the consumer to have an easier experience, for agents to have more, a smoother transaction process. And we're seeing that in a lot of areas. We're certainly leveraging that at Anywhere scale to do that. We're seeing others try and do it. It feels odd to be contemplating going backwards in other areas of the industry, right? And I don't know where it's going to go. And candidly, I'm spending my time focused on what we as an enterprise need to do to drive that result for the consumer. But it is to me an interesting sort of duality to look at when in fact I'm focused on, within our enterprise and our team, is how do we simplify, streamline, and integrate the transaction, not drive further fragmentation in how things are done.
Ultimately, I think there's a lot of fragmentation in the markets where there's a game of prisoner's dilemma happening, right? Where one brokerage is keeping more listings off market, other brokerages are being pulled in to compete in the same way. Well, let's shift gears. I want to talk about Anywhere. I feel like Anywhere is at a really interesting chapter in its story arc. There's been years of transformation, a rebrand. After years of all this transformation, where would you say the company is in its story arc?
You don't land where we are as an enterprise, with the scale that we do, with the growth that we continue to have, with the trusted brands and the consumers, without consistently evolving with, some of our brands are over 100 years old, to newer brands. So I think we are at a really interesting moment in time where we're saying, all right, what's our next arc of growth?
Right.
How are we driving that? What does that look like? That's super exciting for everybody. I think that the technology and the data that we have, it's like an awesome moment in time, because the technology is finally almost capable of leveraging and utilizing the data in a way to, kind of supercharge everything we're trying to do. It's almost like that's our superpower. And now we're going to put it to work a little bit in a way that we haven't before, because all the pieces are coming together. And I do see, we have had these businesses within the homeowner life cycle, and now we're really focused on, and have been for a number of years, capturing that, putting it together. And that's what the consumer wants now. And we're well positioned to continue to drive that growth. And we're ahead of the curve. So it's fun to see.
All right, there's a lot there I want to unpack. I mean, first off, when you talk
I
about...
don't get excited at all or anything
I can
about
tell
this
you're
next chapter.
passionate.
I am.
Yeah. So, I mean, talk to me a little bit about these traditional brands. I mean, the more I've spent time with your brand leaders, the more I've seen that there's this adaptation, right? There's a modernization of these brands to meet millennials and Gen Z where they are. Talk to me about that process.
Yeah, you have to understand who the customer is today and who the customer is tomorrow.
Right.
And no brand with longevity ignores what the future face of homeownership looks like, what the future way of reaching a homeowner looks like, what the brand needs to speak to. And we're very focused on each of our brands has their own unique voice and culture, et cetera. But how do you continue to modernize and drive that forward? And that's listening to your customers. It's being super close. We're in the business. We own brokerage. So we're operating it. We know who the home buyer of the future is. We know what the consumer looks like. So how do we continue to honor the legacy that got us where we are while continuing to serve that future customer? And we do it through data. We do it through technology, consumer insights, brand, kind of awareness, and who is the luxury customer of tomorrow, right? It
Right.
may be very different. You may need to reach them, in a different way through Instagram with our Instagram followers, with Sotheby's International Realty, or, Corcoran's Live Who You Are campaign. These things are very unique to the brands, but very attuned to what the company and the businesses and consumers need today. And what are they going to need tomorrow?
Right.
Yeah.
You also talked about the need to simplify the transaction, both for agents and for consumers. Obviously, Anywhere has access to relocation services and mortgage and brokerage services. Talk to me about how this all comes together, because it seems like you have a vision for how this comes to fruition.
Yeah. So when we look at within our Coldwell Banker Realty footprint, and then we look at our national scale in title, and how do we think about, that's an example, how do we think about marrying those two together to make it more efficient for the consumer, right? Every consumer that buys and sells a home is going to need title. And so how do you think about integrating that? We have the businesses. How do we make it super easy for the agent and the consumer to leverage that, those two products, if you will, that we have, that everyone needs in each transaction? And so when you look at the business, it's about looking at it through the lens of what the consumer needs. What are the assets we have that we can pull together to satisfy the need of that one consumer? So you capture more of that business and ultimately lead to a better process for them. It's giving them option, right? And it's giving them choice, but it's making the process and looking at really the totality of the assets we have under our roof and saying, how do we run them more efficiently? How do we think about them differently in order to drive a better outcome for the consumer as well as for the enterprise?
And as a consumer, I would love that vision to come to fruition. But I've been hearing it for 6 or 7 years. I mean, Brad Inman was on stage talking about this. He had a vision for buying a house, a vision for that being as simple as buying a latte. And there's a lot of companies going after this vision now. You have Zillow, you have Lower, you have Rocket. What makes things different now? Why is now the right time to pursue it?
The reality is we have been working on it for a number of years because we've had the assets that others are chasing, and they're trying to build what we have. So we do have that, and the integrated services, systems, tools, et cetera. I think part of it is it's consumer driven now. Look, 25 years ago, there were some comments about how do we, do some of this, et cetera. The technology wasn't there. The infrastructure wasn't there. And the consumer wasn't necessarily there. I do think we have a step change in that expectation in how consumers consume everything, right? I mean, when you
Right.
think about how in the last 5 years, kind of everything you do as a consumer has changed, at least for the vast majority of us. And that's not just an age demographic thing. That's everyone, right?
It's streamlined. It's easy.
Streamlined. It's easy. How often do you talk to somebody? How often do you actually go to a store? Do you call a restaurant to make reservations anymore? Do you even phone a friend to get a recommendation? Or do you go, you use all these different things? Now, part of that was accelerated through COVID, without question. But part of it is just we're advancing to that point. Do I ever think we're going to make it as easy? Although, I don't know, I've been in Starbucks. I hear some of these orders, Lord knows, they're not that easy. Can't we just order a coffee?
A lot of complexity there.
Yeah, a lot of complexity there. But you have one person delivering the service.
Right.
right? Trained to do all of that. Now, I think we should never underplay the complexity of the real estate transaction that goes so far beyond searching for the home. The complexity starts when you're offline. It truly does. And it's that back end of the transaction. And I think that's what many are trying to focus on now. And that's not all driven by companies choosing to make that change or decision. There's legalities around that. Every state has different so there's a lot of complexity that we're not going to be able to necessarily fix, but it is identifying where we can lean in and make it better.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about teams because you and I were both speaking at the T3 Leadership Summit recently. I was on stage talking about how brokerages need to adapt to and support teams in order to remain competitive. I'm curious if you share that perspective and if you could talk a little bit about the ways that Anywhere is catering to teams.
Absolutely. I think teams are here and proliferating, right? There's a lot of teams that we see out there. I think teams, by definition, you could probably get 15 people in a room and have 15 different definitions of teams. And there's probably like 1,000 in that room alone, right? So there is complexity, shocking, about what defines a team. But ultimately, when you think about teams, their growth, a lot of it is on every agent I talk to, every massive team lead or individual looking to start a team. When I'm speaking with them, they want to scale what they do well. They want to be able to grow their business. So it is a little bit of like, how do I do more? How do I become more efficient in my transactions? How do I do so? I think you may see some products come into play that can help folks grow without necessarily additive members. I think there'll probably be some of that as we see teams grow. But I think you're seeing, the stronger agents get bigger. And I think, you're seeing that through the team dynamic and growth. One of the things we try and do, because whether it's product driven, training, making our ecosystem work well for teams. We have some of the largest teams in the country, in the world, probably within our ecosystem, right? One thing that I think is really important as an industry and as a leader, and I talk to my teams about this, and I talk to, as I said, agents who are thinking about starting teams, start with the why. Why? Why do you want to start a team? Do you really want to run your own business? Do you really just want to be a big team, right? Because a lot of these teams get so big, they're actually a business. And,
Right.
and I've also seen somewhere I sit down and look at the economics, you're not actually making any more money, or you're not actually closing any more transactions, but there's this big team, right? And so I think it's one of the things we try and do across our brands is bring that sort of step by step. What does it mean? What are you trying to accomplish? How can we help you get there? What's first? Do you just want to get an assistant to help you do some stuff? Is there a product that may help you do that now, right? A virtual assistant or some other things. But it is being really relentless and understanding that even if you're within a brokerage, you're kind of starting your own business. And there's a lot of responsibility with that. So what does that mean? I think I love teams. I think there's a great opportunity to continue to support them and evolve. But I think you got to be really clear in what you're setting up when you're starting them.
Yeah, I think you have a measured approach because a lot of brokerage leaders I talk to, they either shy away from the conversation because of the competing economics and the leverage that these teams end up amassing. But then you also have brokerages that are catering to teams in ways that aren't sustainable.
Yeah. I think that comes down to, look, you got to build a sustainable business, whether you're a broker, whether you're an agent, whether you're a team. And that means you've got to have a roadmap. Set your goals a little bit, understand your budget, understand the economics, and then figure out how to go from there. But it all starts with having like your manager, if you're an agent, should be having a really honest conversation with you about it. Your broker should be having a really honest, and you should have a really honest conversation with yourself about the why.
Yeah, and you're right. There's no singular way to define a team. I co-authored and published a report with Tom Ferry and T360 last year called the Teams Report. And the first question we tried to answer is, what is a real estate team? And it's harder than you'd think. So for those of you who are interested in the show notes, I'll post the link to the Teams Report.
Good. Yeah.
You've described this as a growth moment for the industry, specifically with regards to brokerages growing market share. I'm curious what you can tell us about I know you can't comment much on M&A, but obviously there's been some rumors swirling about M&A. I'm curious, what makes a good partner for you to acquire?
Yeah, we've been pretty upfront. I've been pretty open about my desire to grow through mergers and acquisitions. Look, M&A is has to be super strategic, in my opinion. I think you have to, it cannot solely be opportunistic, and it has to be accretive to your business. I think I look at M&A and I think, okay, uh, do I have is this going to be positive to my bottom line, right? Is this going to be, are there synergies I can find? Is there cost takeout through those synergies associated with it? Does it align with my business strategy? I think culture is a huge thing when you look at acquisitions. What's my retention opportunity here, my growth strategy? So I love M&A when done right. But philosophically, I'm not going to do a deal just to do a deal. And I'm not going to, there has to be a sound we have some guiding principles behind it as we're building out our M&A team. And we recently hired a head of M&A for the company, Steve Capezza. And that
I
for
know
me,
Steve.
huh?
I know
Oh yeah,
Steve. Yeah.
Caps, I guess everybody calls him. I'm learning. So hey, Steve. We're pretty principled about it.
Right.
And I think growth, you need to think of it that way. And I think that there's going to be consolidation in our industry right now. And whether it's growth through M&A at the anywhere level, or whether it's M&A and supporting our affiliates in acquiring companies or doing whatever that may be, we're here for it. But it's got to meet our principles, and it's got to make sound business sense for
So
us.
principled approach, but given that you hired Caps, I'm assuming that you're going to be taking a more aggressive M&A approach?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's talk about scale. We talked about this a little earlier in the conversation, but Anywhere wrapped last year having more real estate transactions than any real estate company. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And how do you plan to leverage that scale in a strategic way?
We're doing it, right? I think it's focusing on how do we continue to help our agents, whether it be our franchise agents or our own, to do more business. So how do we continue to put more efficiency behind that? How do we help them leverage their sphere more to gain more business? How do we take the burden over analyzing products and services and all of these things? How do we do that on their behalf and then make things accessible to them? It's not every agent out there is going to be the best analyzer of technology or product or marketing tools, et cetera. And they shouldn't be. So let's put our expertise through that. And then it is continuing to augment that and grow, whether it's capturing more of the economics of the transaction as we do more of those transactions. That's really what we're focused on.
All right, I want to talk about leadership because you've had quite a story and you are such an inspiration for the people within the Anywhere organization. The last few years have just been brutal with litigation and policy change and a slow market. How do you lead a company at this scale through those challenges?
Communication, transparency to the extent you can. We sat back, especially when, if you want to whether you go back to whether it was COVID, whether you go back to any of these things, we as a company became pretty rigorous in our communication cadence. Our EC, so Ryan Schneider and team, what are we meeting on? How frequently are we meeting? Back then it was daily, right? What do our teams need to know? I think from a leadership perspective, you have to communicate even if you don't have anything to communicate, because your team, the folks that are looking to you to say what now, even if you don't know, they need to hear from you. And I think we were Ryan and I set up when we came out of the settlement, a series of calls with our top affiliates. We did town halls with every brand. We had town halls with our employees, just over communicating and doing it consistently with whatever we could do. I think we also, I'm a pretty direct leader, but transparency, honesty, and, assuming good intent. I say that to my team a lot. Let's give each other grace because there's no playbook for a lot of this. And let's assume good intent. And then I think that builds the followership and the belief in where we're going as a company. And then along the way, you give your proof points and you celebrate the wins that the team has, and you keep, staying on your guiding principles and moving forward. And generally you can look back and see some folks behind you then. So it's been, and listening to your team, I would say, in that communication, not talking just at or to, but talking with, and hearing what they need to hear from you. And then being as responsive as you can for that.
What do you want Anywhere to be known for a few years from now that maybe Anywhere isn't known for today?
I believe we will continue to be known as the enterprise leader in our space. I don't think people think of us today as innovative as we are, and we will continue to innovate and to grow and to lead this industry as we see it through its next iteration, as we've done for decades. And for me, that's what I want to be known for, that we've done it without changing who we are.
I love that. I like to end these interviews by asking what success looks like for you. So, what does it look like to live your best life?
All the work aside, all of the accomplishments that, my team and I have done together, living my best life is being happy at home. I mean, it truly is. It's with my daughter and my husband, my crazy dog, and feeling that I'm doing right by all of us, and that we're a pretty solid, happy unit. And sorry, this is long-winded, but a long time ago, somebody asked me about being a mom and working, and I said, look, I listen to two voices. I listen to my husband and my daughter, and if we're all good, then my life is really good. And that's kind of where that's what grounds me in that.
Sounds like a good North Star.
It's a pretty good North Star. So
All right. Well, Sue, thank you so much for joining me, sharing your perspective. For everyone who's watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast app, please be sure to like or subscribe. I'm your host, Andrew Flachner. This is the Playmakers podcast, and we'll catch you next time.